the Afghani issue. So in this sense, today to discuss these countries' regional calculations in Afghanistan, we host distinguished guests joining us from Australia, Dr. Zahid Ahmad, Research Fellow at the Alfred Deakin Institute at Deakin University. Thank you very much for being with us today. Also joining us from Italy, Dr. Abdul Dibsalar, co-leader of the Regional Security Initiative at the European University Institute and adjunct professor at Università Cattolica. Hopefully I spelled it well. And joining us also from Doha, Mr. Yusuf Irim is the senior political analyst at Tأتي World, and I believe that he reached to Doha yesterday to cover the active Qatari diplomacy in the Afghani issue in particular. So we are very lucky to have him today also. So on behalf of Ibn Khaldun Center for Humanities and Social Sciences and Qatar University, thank you very much, our guests, for being with us today. I am very privileged to moderate this very timely and important event, and I would like to personally thank our guests for being with us today despite the very short notice. Without further ado, I will ask my question, and my first question will be to Dr. Ahmed. How does Pakistan perceive the US withdrawal from Afghanistan? And what does it mean, in your opinion, for Pakistan-US relations, especially vis-a-vis Afghanistan? We know that in the post 9/11 period, the US-Pakistani relations deteriorated significantly, and the Americans were mainly blaming Pakistan for whatever Taliban and other groups did. So how do you think the current situation will affect the Pakistan-US relations in the light of the latest US withdrawal from the country? So the floor is yours, or the air is yours in this case.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bakir, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to speak in this very timely event. You have posed very difficult questions to me to begin with. But I think, the relationship with the US and Pakistan, their relationship has been problematic since the very beginning. Since 1947, of course, Pakistan's, inherent security dilemma with reference to India pushed it towards these security alliances with the US. But the relationship had its ups and downs, and especially post 9/11, because Pakistan was only among the 3 countries that recognized the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, and the other 2 were the UAE and Saudi Arabia. So the US knew that post 9/11, they needed Pakistan's support to go against the Taliban, and also to use Pakistan's, military bases and also, other facilities to be able to operate in Afghanistan. But the relationship, was difficult even during the so-called war on terror, and became more difficult when, for example, Osama bin Laden was killed in Pakistan and Abbottabad, which is not too far away from the capital of the country. And also, but I think Pakistan over the years, it has also realized that it has to change its narrative and look at the situation in Afghanistan differently. So if you look at how Pakistan has approached the US-Taliban peace deal, it was very much supportive of the deal. It has been very much also in favor of the US troop withdrawal, similar to the case of other Afghanistan neighbors. They all have been on the same page with regard to the US troop withdrawal. And Pakistan also, hosted just in the past 1 year or so, Pakistan hosted the Taliban delegations, I think, on 3 or 4 occasions. What has changed in Pakistan is that prior to this peace deal, Pakistan used to not showcase its relationship with the Taliban. But since the peace deal, Pakistan has found this new confidence that they can also, show that they have some leverage in relation to the Taliban, and they can support also the peace deal and also intra-Afghan peace dialogues. So I think these have been important developments. And now moving forward, of course, with the US, the relationship is again going to be difficult. But what Pakistan is doing, Pakistan is now not willing to take the front seat. with reference to what is going to happen now in Afghanistan. It is looking for a regional approach. And as you talked about the Qatari foreign minister being engaged in, shuttle diplomacy, Pakistan's foreign minister actually before that also was engaged in shuttle diplomacy, went to Central Asian states, he went to Tehran, and also have been in communication with, he also went to Beijing, have been in communication with the Gulf countries and so on. So I think the new policy is to not be the front player, because then you'll have to face most of the blame, as was the case in the past. So I think this realization is there in Pakistan. And while historically also, for the past, especially since the Belt and Road Initiative, you can say that Pakistan is gradually moving closer to China, but at the same time, it wants to have balanced relations with the US and China. So, it's a developing country. It cannot just choose one strong state over the other. So moving forward, I think Pakistan will still try to resolve its differences with the US. And it also depends on whether US still wants to play any role in Afghanistan. If they do not want to play any role and do not want to influence, let's say, the new setup in Afghanistan, I think going forward, Pakistan will have very limited options, but to look towards other partners like the Gulf states and Afghanistan's other neighbors, especially China. You are on mute.
Sorry, was that? Can you hear me right now? Okay, sorry for that. I think it was satisfying answer. We move to Dr. Dibsalar. Now, in 2001, actually, Iran reportedly helped the US to overthrow Taliban. And at certain point, Iran also decided to support some Taliban fractions against the US. Now, when both United States and Taliban reached an agreement in Doha in 2000, Iran opposed that agreement. But now we see a different approach and a different position. So how Iran assists, in your opinion, the US withdrawal from Afghanistan, and what are the implications of this withdrawal regarding Iran's position in Afghanistan, and also regarding the US-Iranian relations? Please, Dr. Dibsalar.
Thank you, Dr. Bakr. First of all, let me thank you for having me in this very interesting and timely debate. Actually, regarding the Iranian position of a US presence in the Middle East in broad sense, I think Iran has been consistently asking for US troops to leave the region. We see this policy of calling US forces to leave in Iraq, from Syria, and of course also from Afghanistan. So I think on a very grand level, the policy of Iranians is pushing US outside the Middle East in broad term, and particularly in the Persian Gulf region and its neighborhood. But beyond this very formal announcement of policy, I think there are several reasons that we can believe that Iran was not also so much in reality keen in favor of leaving US forces from the region. I think many of us may agree that most of the regional actors were actually, at least in a way that the Trump administration and also the Biden administration, in a way, were interpreted that were free riders. They were using the privilege of stabilization that U.S. forces and NATO presence in Afghanistan were providing, and of course also the European policing and internal security help that was the major help of the West in the last 20 years to Afghanistan. So these were all the things that I think for Iran were important to have the stability in its neighborhood, despite its broader policy that didn't want US to stay in close borders to Afghanistan. So I think there are several reasons that we may argue that why actually now this is a kind of a headache for Iranian politicians in Tehran. I think at least three factors are playing a role here. First is about the time of this withdrawal. I think the timing of withdrawal was not was not perceived good for Iranians, because as you know, Iran in a broader term is now engaged on the nuclear file. So it has a very tension time on the nuclear side front. On the regional front with the Arab states and the Persian Gulf, so there is a crisis over there also. Then there's the missile issue, there's the COVID, let's say, economic implications, and the broader impacts of maximum pressure, which all in all have caused a kind of restrained resources for Iranian to fill this gap. So we see a different dynamic from when Iran in early 2000, late 2000, and early during the last decade entered into Iraq and Syria. So the timing was basically not in a proper way for Iranians to enter and fill the gap of the US withdrawal, what they were basically wanted to. And also the modality of the US withdrawal, I would call it, was quite important. I think many were basically surprised by the very fast capture of Kabul and the rest of the Afghanistan. And I think also Iranians were also somehow surprised by this fast takeover of the whole territories, which basically prevented any external actor, including Tehran, to draft a kind of a policy in order to keep project power into Afghanistan and keep its military presence or whatever influence and fill the gap. So basically what we see was a kind of a withdrawal both on the timing and on the modality that prevented the regional competitors of the US to fill the gap of this strategic vacuum that was caused by US withdrawal. But I think also there is an issue of the strategic value of Afghanistan for Iran too, that has prevented, let's say, any opportunity by perceived opportunity by Iranians to get into Afghanistan or try to spend forces or energy on Afghanistan more than what they are doing now. And that is the fact that Afghanistan is not part of that greater game that Iran perceives and wants to play on the regional scale. Iran is mostly looking westward when it wants to play on the regional side. It means Iraq, Syria, and that's basically has a logic behind. It's part of its let's say, defense doctrine in a wake of a possible US or Israeli threat, so that it finds a kind of a strategic value for Iranians to be present in Iraq and in Syria. But in Afghanistan, we don't have these strategic criticalities of the terrain itself from the very strategic thinking perspective of people in Tehran. And also, I think there is an understanding from the fact that many in Tehran are believing that spending more energy and time in Afghanistan could be a kind of a trap, what we saw with the Soviets and the US. And at the end of the day, well, we may, they may engage in a kind of a battle that there is no strategic value into it. So all in all, I would like to stress the fact that from the Iranian perspective, I think there is one level of formal policy of pushing on the withdrawal of US or claiming that as a kind of a victory of anti-American policy in a broad term, but at the internal level, a layer below that, that is not a very positive development in Iranian neighborhood. So I would see the Iranian calculation very much from the point of view of the emerging threats and emerging risks that are coming out from the future of Afghanistan. I will stop here. Back to you.
That's interesting. Actually, I would like to comment on one point you have mentioned, that Iran, as so many countries, were surprised by the quick expansion of Taliban and the control over the country in a short period of time. Some observers think that actually Iran was one of the early players to anticipate this fast fall of the Afghani government and the control of Taliban, and they think that because of this, the Iranian government engaged early with Taliban and invited even Taliban delegation to Tehran. How accurate this assessment in your opinion?
I wanted to comment on this issue later, but now that you raised it, I think, you know, Iran is among those actors that have one of the best intelligence and field information from inside Afghanistan. That basically prevents major strategic surprises. But at the same time, what I argued is the fact that I think Iranians were prepared for possible Taliban empowering in the next few months. But what was surprising was that very short, a week or two week-long period that was basically made any planning for this transitory period impossible. So my argument was based on the fact that this short period of this modality of the withdrawal, this short period of withdrawal, basically prevented external actors like Iran that might have some interest in to fill the gap to basically draw an operational plan in a way that is feasible to proceed. And that's why Iran, I will argue next part of my discussion, that went toward more a kind of a cost mitigation strategy in order to control. So if that strategic surprise has not caused, at least from the Iranian perspective, a major cost at the short term.
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Yusuf, you know, the Turkey-US relations have been suffering a lot during the last decade, and just before US decided to withdraw from Afghanistan, the Turkish government offered to run Kabul's international airport. Now, many observers still don't understand the point or the motives behind this effort. In your opinion, what are the strategic motivations or drivers behind this offer, and how it would serve the fixing the Turkey-US relations? Because many experts argued that one goal of this offer is to actually fix the relation with the US.
Ali, thanks for having me. Thanks to the Ibn Khaldun Center and also Qatar University. It is a timely event, very, very timely that I also came to Qatar because this event is an academic reflection of what Qatar is trying to do diplomatically, and the university bringing together these experts from all countries that have influence and have impact on Afghanistan. I think a great event. So I'm very happy to be part of this. Now, when we look at what Turkey's doing, I kind of want to answer the first question that you asked to the other guests a little too, how Turkey viewed the American withdrawal. I think Turkey, already being on the ground, part of the International Security Assistance Force, and having been in Afghanistan for well over a decade, had a little better insight into what the United States was doing, or at least trying to do. And when we saw the withdrawal decision slowly come, while many countries were shocked, I think Turkey has already experienced how chaotic an American withdrawal can be from the partial withdrawal in northeast Syria that the Americans undertook, which was also equally chaotic, but on a much smaller scale. So we didn't see this countrywide revival of conflict as we did in Afghanistan. And it turned, the Syria withdrawal ended up turning into a handover to Russia and the Assad regime. But that's a different story. Let's get back to Afghanistan. So the Turks have a very good understanding of what American withdrawals could look like. And Turkey was one of the countries very first to talk about the airport, talk about providing some type of stabilization, some type of security at a key transportation asset, a key asset that would be used in the future for humanitarian aid. And we saw a lot of diplomacy between Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu and U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken in that lead up to the American withdrawal as well. And I don't think the Turks were very, very surprised by the Taliban takeover and how quickly the Taliban was able to gain large swaths of ground. Now, I know that Ankara had very good relations with the Kabul government, but they also had some type of dialogue with the Taliban as well, even though it was low level. So the actions on the ground and the realities on the ground, the shift on the ground, I don't think surprised the Turks too much. They were prepared to provide security at the airport. And this isn't something new. The Turks have provided security at Kabul International Airport in the past. Now, the original plan was to go in to the airport and provide security with Pakistan and Hungary, at least according to the Turkish president. And a small anecdote, I had a conversation about late July with a Pakistani official, and I actually went and congratulated him that Pakistan was going to be providing security at the airport. And very surprising was his reaction. He looked at me, he's like, oh no, he's like, we're not going to be on the ground. And I was surprised because I figured that it was a done deal since Pakistan was being mentioned rhetorically. And he's like, we're not going to be on the ground. And I was very shocked. So I tried to maneuver and recover and saying, well, I hope Pakistan will have a very important diplomatic role to play. But that was a little bit of a shock to me. But to continue on, I think the Turks were a little disappointed at such a quick withdrawal. It could have been prepared and coordinated much better with inside NATO. But again, I don't think the Turks were unprepared. I think countries like the UK and France and other NATO actors who were part of the coalition, who were part of ISAF, I think they were much more taken back. Now, what's Turkey doing at Kabul airport? What does it want to do at Kabul airport? Well, when I see the most recent meeting between Turkish foreign minister and his Qatari counterpart, it looks like there is some type of finished deal. There are Turkish and Qatari presence at the airport right now. They seem to be working forward. Now, from a Taliban perspective, I think Turkey operating the airport is a huge win for them. While this does not mean any type of recognition, and we've seen Turkish officials state that there won't be any hasty recognitions, and they've advised the international community also not to make hasty decisions. It gives some type of credibility and some type of security assurances to humanitarian aid groups that want to work there, to international flights that want to operate in and out of Kabul. And I think this is a very important window for the Taliban to be able to engage that very, very first step in diplomacy, which would be stabilization and security at a key major transportation asset. Now, from a Turkish foreign policy perspective, we've seen Turkey make a lot of gains and spread a lot of influence throughout Central Asia. And I think Afghanistan, and especially a very important asset like Kabul airport, is a very important part of that Central Asia strategy. Ever since the Nagorno-Karabakh war, where Azerbaijan was able to liberate its territory, Turkey has really increased its diplomacy amongst the Central Asian nations. Many, many trips back and forth to Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan as well. There's going to be a very important summit of Turkic-speaking states. I believe it's either at the end of October or beginning of November, where President Erdogan will be meeting with all the leaders from these Central Asian republics. And I can assume that Afghanistan will be very, very high on that list. And I think that's a very, very intriguing platform for them to talking about Afghanistan. But as I said, a very important part of Central Asian strategy for Turkey, Afghanistan, a stepping stone to that strategy as well. And again, Belt and Road was mentioned. I think Kabul airport will be a key asset in any type of logistics. And Turkey has been very, very interested in Belt and Road, an important part of the middle corridor that spans from China through Kazakhstan, the Caspian Sea, Azerbaijan, and Turkey. But also Turkey's undertaken investments and been part of investments like the Istanbul-Tehran, Islamabad train railway.
We will talk about this point in particular later, but let me here interrupt you to comment on one important note that you have mentioned. You said that the Pakistanis were not willing to put boots on the ground, and I think that even if they're willing, they don't have to, because of the special relation with the Taliban and their influence in Pakistan. But let's incorporate this note with the coming question to Dr. Ahmed. For so long, Taliban was considered as a Pakistani proxy in many circles around the world in the last 2 decades. And a few days after the withdrawal of the US forces from Afghanistan, the general director of the Pakistani intelligence visited Kabul and met with Taliban figures. Actually, it is said that this is the first official visit for any official in the world to Taliban after the US withdrawal. So building on this development, how do you characterize the Pakistani-Taliban relations at this moment, and to what extent the idea that Pakistan emerged as the biggest winner from the US withdrawal is accurate in your opinion?
I think this is an important question, considering many of the dynamics. I think history here again is important. So, especially with reference to a degree to which Pakistan was able to control the Taliban in the past. I think that's important from the proxy wars dynamics or proxy dynamics, for example. And country or a patron state can exercise a degree of influence based on, for example, diplomatic support, financial support, supply of weapons, and by providing refuge and so on. So if we look at, like especially when the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan was there from 1996 to 2001, so Pakistan's two primary, you can say, national interests have always been linked to India's presence in Afghanistan. So in 1996, you can say that Pakistan achieved that because India had its only one embassy in Kabul and they closed it. And India wasn't there in Afghanistan until 9/11. Until the end of 2001, you can say. And the second objective of Pakistan was to, national interest has been, with reference to Afghanistan, has been to deal with the issue of border demarcation. There's a border dispute between the two countries on the Durand Line issue. So even when the Taliban were there, they did not recognize the Durand Line as the permanent border between Pakistan and Afghanistan. So that national interest was never met. And if you look at what happened after 2001 when Pakistan joined the war on terror, a few of the key developments are that Pakistani security forces, they did go after the Afghan leaders who were in Afghanistan. So for example, the Islamic Emirates ambassador to Pakistan, he was captured by the Pakistani security forces and handed over to the US. Many other Taliban leaders were also captured and they were handed over to the US. Some ended up in Guantanamo as well. So there's, there have been ups and downs. But if you look at, another key aspect is that where I think the US miscalculated the situation to a great extent, they ignored the geopolitical dynamics. The more space they allowed India in Afghanistan, allowed Pakistan to resume its support for the Taliban. And that happened around, for example, 2004 and 5, when Taliban, they reorganized through Quetta Shura in Balochistan province in Pakistan. So they started reorganizing there, and then they returned to the battlefield around 2005 and 6. And another key aspect there is that the US was also, distracted by the war in Iraq. So they left this unfinished sort of business here. I won't say completely left it, but they were, distracted towards that war as well. And so when you talk about, Pakistan's relationship with the Taliban, it's again guided by their mutual interests. They wanted the US troops to leave. What Taliban wants from Pakistan is also, they wanted this recognition. They wanted this diplomatic support to convince the international community and regional actors that they are a legitimate political actor in Afghanistan. And if you recall, even for the past 10 years or so, Pakistan was perhaps the only country consistently asking the US and other regional actors to engage in a dialogue with the Taliban. Okay, so finally that has happened, I think, to Pakistan's benefit. Again, what has happened, like in 1996, India has closed all its diplomatic missions in Afghanistan. So India had now this time around one embassy in Kabul and 4 consulates, even in areas closer to Pakistan's border. So that was very concerning to Pakistan. So Pakistan has achieved that purpose. But similar to the case of neighboring countries, now that Pakistan has achieved its short-term objective, now everyone is worried about the spillover in the form of extremism and terrorism. So going forward, I think what Pakistan is going to do is to continue pressurizing the Taliban to take strict actions against anti-Pakistan groups like Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. So the relationship is already very uncomfortable now at this very moment. Well, Pakistan is trying to gain all the diplomatic support because it cannot provide economic support. Its economy doesn't allow it, so it has sent, for example, aid in the form of food and medicine, but cannot, commit millions of dollars in aid considering its own economic situation. But another strategy that Pakistan is adopting, that now that Pakistan is, in my opinion, has already lost its leverage with reference to the Taliban, because what why Pakistan was having that leverage was because of they were hosting, for example, Taliban leaders in Pakistan and their families in Pakistan. And now they have returned to Afghanistan already. So that leverage, in my opinion, is gone. What Taliban needs from Pakistan now is this more support and international recognition, because with that, perhaps they can get their funds released that are frozen, and also they can get this, international aid and so on. And I must also add that Pakistan's now new strategy to deal with the Taliban also involves China. And recently, when there was an attack on Chinese citizens in Pakistan who were part of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor under the Belt and Road Initiative, Pakistan asked China to directly talk to the Taliban, because they understand that now China has, that upper hand, and they want China to take a leading role in Afghanistan. So going forward, I think the situation will be complex. This intelligence chief's visit from Pakistan was wrongly timed, because it just led to more fake news and more criticism of Pakistan's role, perhaps in Panjshir especially. But the way Pakistan is now trying to counter it is that Pakistan's ISI chief also hosted a regional conference of intelligence chiefs of all neighboring countries, involving also from Russia, Iran, and China just yesterday. So I think going forward, they want to have this collective approach in Afghanistan, and in my opinion, that will best serve Pakistan's interests to stay, behind the curtains, to not be a dominant actor in Afghanistan any longer.
Thank you very much. You have mentioned very important point, in my opinion, about the Panjshir and the fake news promoted by India. Unfortunately, we don't have an Indian guest with us today. Probably we will plan to host Indian, Chinese, Russian, and American experts in the next round or session later. But interestingly, these fake news about Panjshir also influenced the Iranian public, and I hear that many anti-Pakistani during the last few days have erupted in Iran regarding this issue. So we will move to Dr. Dibsalar, and we will ask that for so long, Taliban was promoted inside Iran as a force of radicalization and even sometimes as terrorism. But before it starts to promote another narrative and image of Taliban inside Iran, especially during the last few months, which is obviously tailored to suit Iran's interest in this matter. In your opinion, what's the motive behind such behavior and shifting from the Iranian government, and what are the internal discussions regarding the shift of the government vis-a-vis the image of Taliban inside Iran?
Well, that's a good question. I think, the Iran and the Taliban's relation was quite a difficult one. I mean, it was in 1998 that 8 Iranian diplomats and a reporter killed in Mazar Sharif, and that erupted basically a crisis that was going to be a kind of Iranian infiltration into the controlled areas inside Afghanistan by Taliban. But I think the relation evolved based on the real dynamics and changes on the ground. What I mean is the real change in the military balance of power, and the real power that Taliban was able to achieve. Going a bit backward, I think there is a period that Iran had some interest in using Taliban in countering or pressuring U.S. presence in the region. That is the period, particularly after 2003, during 2004 to 2009, that basically the type of relation is very much based on adjusting and using Taliban in adjustment with the U.S. threat of possible attack to Iran. So that's a period that relation between Iran and Taliban is very much a kind of particular support by Quds forces toward fractions of Taliban in countering and pressuring U.S. for limiting U.S. freedom of movement in Afghanistan, and then raising cost for U.S. operation in Afghanistan. But as I said, I think the real policy in Iran is very much based on the pragmatism that is defined by the developments on the ground. The reality is that, you know, the idea of withdrawal was on the table at least from 2014, the US withdrawal. So, I mean, there is a couple of years at least that fractions of Taliban has controlled areas and borderlines with Iran. Almost 700 to 800 kilometers of 950 kilometer borderline with Iran was merely controlled by Taliban forces even before these incidents. So there were a lot of joint or common issues like the border issue, like the custom issue, and the movement and the transit of the goods. That was basically was done in a kind of a collaboration or a kind of a, let's say, informal agreement between Iran and Taliban in order to safeguard these movements of the goods and so on. So I would like to say that there was a kind of a coexistence defined after a time that Taliban little by little tried to gain land and power. But this was not on the level of the media coverage, or this was not on the level of, let's say, public narrative, because still the government in Kabul was there. I mean, this period is a period that categorized by many in Tehran as a period of the Ashraf Ghani's not cooperating mood toward Iran, and that's a period that Ashraf Ghani basically is not cooperating with in many demands of the Iranians regarding securing the border and safeguarding the transit route. That's why Iran moved toward cooperating with Taliban. So my point is that this pragmatism and realism on the ground, which is defined by the rules of the ground, when it comes to the current situation, which is a complete military superiority of Taliban, is still continued. So what really defines Iran's strategy is the superiority and the hardware superiority of Taliban on the ground. But this is not necessarily equal to how civil society and public opinion in Tehran are thinking. So that's here where the divergence between the state and security policy in Iran is taking place, and how people and civil society think. Because anyway, you know that it's almost 36% of the Afghan population are Farsi speaking, or they're derivatives of Farsi language speaking in a broader concept. So there are a lot of cultural relations. There are over 3 million Afghans in Iran having a direct contact with the Iranian community. So there is a huge level of sympathy. And considering the fact that many of also intellectual materials that has been taught, for example, in universities in Afghanistan, the books, the materials, educational things. So there is a huge soft power that is coming from that social and society to society level connections. That is normal to expect that society is not necessarily in line with the state. So what I'm trying to say is that this divide between state and security narrative and the social narrative is also very much politicized in Iran. For example, we see that reformists are these days, you know, very much using the narrative of a social capital that Iran has in Afghanistan as a resources that should be protected. So they start to criticize and create a kind of a debate against the current Raisi administration, or broadly speaking against any conservative or conservative policy in Tehran, which is very much focused on security and state survival issues. So this divide between society and the state, I think it's quite vivid right now among the type of debates which is happening. But one more thing before I end up this your question is, I think it's important, is the fact that for Tehran, the format of relation with Taliban is very much defined by how much threats Tehran perceives from the not cooperating and not collaborating with Taliban. So basically, I think in Iranian calculation, there is an assessment that there is a cost of not collaborating or not cooperating with Taliban. That cost or not influencing the dynamic of politics in Afghanistan. That cost, what is that cost? That cost is what we were before talking. It's about the growing discussion about the role of, for example, Turkey. So the fact that Turkey is now moving toward the Central Asia and then down to Iranian neighborhood, there is this ongoing debate that what is that intention? Is that a kind of a surrounding, or is it kind of a siege that Iran is being under siege of the Turkey, or is there a kind of alliance between Turkey, a distribution of security assistance role between US and Turkey? Is there a kind of a behind deal between these external actors? So these are the emerging understandings of threat, but also the issue of, for example, Saudi Arabia, possible connection of Saudis with fractions of Taliban. So these dynamic of emerging threat, I think, is another very strong driver of how Iran adjusts its policies with its relation and shape its nature of relation when it comes to Taliban.
Thank you very much. I think that you have mentioned two important points that we can discuss also later. One is the refugees, and this matter is actually impacting other countries, including Turkey, as far as I know, and probably Pakistan also. And the second is Turkey's strategy in Central Asia. Now, before we move to Mr. Yusuf Erim, I would like to remind our audience that there is a simultaneous translation from English to Arabic on the other channel, or the link that is already published. They can join to listen the Arabic translation from there, and they can also, of course, write their questions so that we can try to address them at the end of the session. Now, Mr. Yusuf, it is said that one of the disadvantages of Turkey in Afghanistan was actually the lack of communication between the Turkish government and Taliban, unlike, for example, countries like Pakistan, Qatar, Russia, even China, even Iran. So this was considered one of the disadvantages of Turkey in Afghanistan, which led to also a misunderstanding between the two parties when Turkey offered to secure and run Kabul's airport before, of course, Taliban later on asked Ankara to help, to offer technical help and run the airport with Qatar and declare Turkey as an important partner in the future of Afghanistan. Now, my question in this regard is, how do you think the Turkey-Taliban relations currently are going, and will Turkey recognize any future government without preconditions?
First, I want to just very quickly answer my Iranian friends.
Take your time. Take your time.
I believe the concerns that Tehran has of Turkey encircling Iran, I think Ankara shares those concerns when it looks south into Iraq and to Syria and to Lebanon and sees Iran-backed militia all over the place, Hezbollah and other groups that are very loyal to Tehran. So I think that's a shared concern both in Turkey and Iran. Both feel like the other is trying to surround itself in a security perspective. So I don't think that's a unilateral, but we both share that feeling towards each other. But to get back to the point, I believe that Turkey's going. First thing, there will not be any unconditional recognition of the Taliban by Turkey. There will be conditions. There are expectations that Turkey will have before it can recognize the Taliban. And I mean, when we look at the rhetoric coming out of Ankara, same thing with the Turkish foreign minister and with the Turkish president as well. They understand that there needs to be dialogue, and Turkey has had dialogue with non-state actors previously in other countries, where they begin this dialogue at first on an intelligence level or maybe a envoy level, and then it is increased to a foreign ministry level and then brought finally to the top level. So this type of diplomacy, Turkey has many instruments to partake in diplomacy to be able to distance itself from full recognition before it has a complete understanding of exactly what the Taliban wants. And until it can relay its messages of conditions that it would have before real formal relations and formal top-level negotiations or top-level talks are undertaken. So Turkey operates in the Middle East, and this is a very complicated region. We all know this is a very complicated region. So it's important to have these types of diplomatic instruments and be prepared for situations like this. And as I said, Turkey has had these types of situations before. So it's going to continue. It had a meeting already with the Taliban. The Afghan ambassador had I believe, a 3-hour meeting with the Taliban. And that's not the final meeting. There will be many more meetings. And I don't think that Turkey's lack of diplomacy or lack of communication with the Taliban is too much of a disadvantage. I do understand that obviously a country like Pakistan and Iran, who are both border countries and who have a much more vested interest, especially from a national security perspective, will engage in much heavier diplomacy and much more frequent diplomacy than Turkey will. But I do think that Turkey, through conduits like Pakistan or Qatar, can relay the necessary messages to the Taliban, and also, as I said before, using the instruments that they have, can get that diplomacy going forward. So I don't think that it's a disadvantage. I don't think there's been too much of a lack of communication. We have to realize that Turkey is now undergoing a metamorphosis in its role in Afghanistan, not just as a NATO actor anymore. It's not part of a NATO coalition. So the understanding of it being a member of the International Security Assistance Forces kind of finished in Turkey shedding its skin and now acting as a unilateral actor as itself inside Afghanistan. So I think the role of Turkey is changing. It's going to continue to be a non-combative role as it has been for the past 2 decades, and it's going to continue with its diplomacy. But I don't think anything has changed, and Turkey has a lot of very strong relations with neighboring states around Afghanistan. As I mentioned, Pakistan, a country that Turkish defense minister has visited lately, Turkish foreign minister has visited lately, and many top-level Pakistani officials have come to Turkey as well. Very important relationship, a very important top-level phone call between Iran and Turkey very recently as well. So I don't see a problem in communications with the Taliban in any which way. But I do think Turkey is going to be very, very cautious going forward. And I don't think that Turkey will unilaterally recognize the Taliban before having an important discussion with other NATO members and also with members of the international community, because I don't think this should be a decision that one person should take. I think there's certain shared values that Turkey has with its partners that it expects the Taliban to meet before any type of recognition. So I don't think this is a decision only one country will make, at least when we look at it from a Western perspective. I think this is a decision that'll be taken from a block of countries, and Turkey doesn't want to act too hasty and go ahead to formal recognition without having the proper correspondence and negotiations and discussions with its Western partners. And also one more, I just want to add one more. I just want to add one more little thing. I believe Mr. Ahmed mentioned that the Americans read the situation on the ground very bad, especially between that 2004-2016 period. I've had a lot of talks with American officials, especially people who were officials and on the ground during that time. I interviewed the former commander of NATO troops in Afghanistan and former CIA director, General Petraeus, just about 3 weeks ago. And my understanding in talking to him was they actually did have a very good understanding of what was going on the ground. But I felt that there was a deterioration between the White House and the US intelligence and security apparatus. And we saw that a lot during the Trump period. And it looks like it's continuing during Biden, where the White House and the US State Department is kind of downgrading the information they're getting from Langley and from the troops on the ground, and moving forward more in a foreign policy perspective without valuing the insight of intelligence. And that's what I understood. I mean, I don't know, but in my conversations with former US officials from that period, it seemed that they understood very well what was going on the ground, and they understood that trying to build this nation, trying to build the state, and was not feasible anymore, that the second US support was pulled, that the Afghan government was going to crumble and that Taliban was gaining power. So it seemed that they did have a good understanding, but the lines of communication, at least, or the level that the White House valued the information that was coming to them was greatly disquantified, I should say.
Okay, I know that we gave you a lot of time, but just quickly, please, can you hint, because you have mentioned that any future recognition of the government in Afghanistan will not be unconditional. So what type or kind of conditions that Turkey might put on forming such government? And second, there were some reports regarding the refugee issues, Afghani refugee issues issue in Turkey. We know that Turkey hosts around 3 million Syrian refugee, and there is a wave of Afghani refugees towards Turkey lately, and Ankara already hosts, I think, more than 100,000, correct me if I'm wrong, Afghani. So there are some of the observers who think that this is a deliberate Iranian strategy to let these Afghani refugees pass through its border towards Turkey, to put pressure on Turkey in Syria. How accurate such assessment might be, and what are the reactions coming from Turkey regarding this issue?
Well, Turkey has undertaken building a wall on the Iran border. Much of it's completed, but you know, the same accusation is made by the EU to Turkey regarding Syrian refugees, and I don't see Turkey having a systematic strategy of letting Syrians flood the EU. At the end of the day, there was a migrant deal between Turkey and the EU, and when the migrant deal wasn't upheld, Turkey said Syrians are free to go where they want. So I didn't see Turkey have that type of strategy with the EU. So I don't believe that Iran has that type of strategy versus Turkey. At the end of the day, these are migrants. They're free to roam around. If Iran is letting them move to Turkey, if their final destination is Turkey, or moving on, continuing to move on to Europe, so be it. They may, but Turkey will take its precautions on its border. I believe the official number was 117,000 Afghans before the U.S. withdrawal. So that number right now is most likely 300, 400,000. Turkey has 3.5 million Syrians, another 300,000 Iraqis as well. So almost 5 million refugees, maybe even more. Who knows? I mean, we've lost count of the official number. So the migrant situation, obviously very, very important. And that's one of the reasons why Turkey is trying to be a very effective and influential player in Afghanistan as well. Making sure the situation is stable in the home country, making sure it's safe and secure is always the best way to fight migration. Building walls or making diplomatic deals is not the way to fight migration. The way to fight migration is at its home country and making sure it's secure and stable. And Turkey wants to play an important role, an important part of that. You asked the first question, I forgot it. Can you just repeat it very quickly?
About the conditions of Turkey.
Okay, I don't think Turkey has very specific conditions that are different from what the West is. Obviously, freedom of movement for Afghans, more inclusivity inside the government, seeing more Hazara, seeing more Uzbek, seeing more Tajiks inside the government, more of the minorities inside the government, seeing women inside the government, more women's rights. I think these are the basic demands of almost every country. So I think that if the Taliban could meet some or many of these demands, I don't foresee any reason why Turkey wouldn't recognize the Taliban, just like many other countries would also line up to recognize the Taliban as well. But when these are not being met, I only see a very, very small group of countries recognizing the Taliban, and Turkey won't be part of those.
Okay, thank you very much. Now moving to Dr. Ahmed, compared to Doha, for example, Pakistan's role is clearly less active. Now, you have mentioned some of the reasons in this regard, but some other countries like Turkey they have some expectations regarding what Pakistan can do right now and in the future in Afghanistan. Now, in your opinion, what Pakistan can offer to Turkey in Afghanistan in this period of time?
First of all, I think expectations are different from different kind of actors. So to begin with, all the Western countries or NATO members, they were, they wanted Pakistan to help in the evacuation process. Pakistan has done that. With Gulf countries, the relationship is very special. So it's both ways. What Pakistan is trying to, again, I'm repeating myself, but trying to do two things to gain enough support for the new Taliban-led setup. And the idea was to, also push Taliban to create some kind of an inclusive government, which for the time being, it doesn't look like they are actually going to do that. If you look at their 33 members government that they have announced, there are only 2 Tajiks and 1 Uzbek. So there's no Hazara representation. Of course, there are no women as well. So it's not inclusive. It's making things very difficult for Pakistan to continue really continuous lobbying for the new Taliban-led government in Kabul. So it's making it difficult for Pakistan. With Gulf countries, again, the relationship is different. But with Turkey, I think the main, point of contact was that Pakistan was also supportive of Turkey's case to provide security to the Kabul airport. Although historically, if you look at when there was Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, Turkey was supporting the Northern Alliance, like other neighboring countries like Iran and Russia and so on. So the relationship was problematic then, and it was the Taliban this time around who were not willing to allow Turkey to take that kind of a leading role. So Pakistan's role in this regard, and for example, promoting Turkey's agenda is not very clear. But it's clear with regard to other regional actors. What Pakistan is trying to achieve also are various objectives. You mentioned the issue of refugees. I'll come to that. But first of all, Pakistan is trying to have a friendly government in Kabul. And in the shape of the Taliban-led government, they have that. And if you look at other actors in the previous government, as soon as the Taliban took over, #sanction Pakistan was one of the most popular hashtags on Twitter. I think it was used for close to 1 million times in just first 48 hours. So what Pakistan is trying to show that it is not having any favorites in Afghanistan, and it also wants to equally support other actors. And then I think is the issue, which is the most important issue with regard to Pakistan's own interest now. It wants really, I think, speaking to Pakistani policymakers and also people in the military establishment, I can tell that they're very much interested in a stable Afghanistan, because if you look at the Belt and Road Initiative, the amount of money that China has spent in Pakistan, $64 billion, Afghanistan is really the missing piece of puzzle if Pakistan wants to fully utilize the potential of Gwadar. And it's a shared interest with also involving China as well. And then is the issue of, I mentioned the border dispute issue. For the time being, I think by having a friendly regime like the Taliban in Kabul, Pakistan can ignore that issue. They don't have to push for it to be resolved, But finally is the issue of refugees. I think sooner or later, after the issue of terrorism concerning, some of the anti-Pakistan groups, operating from Afghanistan, once that is resolved, Pakistan is going to again hope, like in the 1996 when the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan was established, a lot of Afghan refugees returned to Afghanistan from Pakistan, and in large numbers. In the 1980s, Pakistan had close to 4.5 million to 5 million refugees in Pakistan. The number dropped when the Taliban took over the country in in the shape of Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. The number dropped to around like 3 million, and it has stayed like that in Pakistan. And that includes also 1.5 million who are undocumented. And so Pakistan's desire is going to be, again, to discuss with the Taliban to ensure that those refugees return, because Pakistan has consistently been raising this issue for the past many years, that those refugees have to go back, and on the request of UNHCR, it has kept on giving extensions. But I think that issue will soon be raised by Pakistan. And if you look at, Pakistan has also fenced its border with Afghanistan, and it's not like the past. And now it's only allowing people who have visas, valid visas for Pakistan, and also onwards visas to, let's say, European countries or Australia and so on. So only those Afghans are now entering into Pakistan and then leaving the country soon after. So considering that, I think also, Pakistan's approach has changed. And again, I think there are economic realities that we have to understand. Pakistan's economic reality is very different, although and it's relying a lot on economically strong Muslim countries, especially from the Gulf. And maybe this has been discussed with Turkey as well, but I'm not aware of that. But with China, Pakistan has been very clear on this, that China needs to provide more financial support for the Taliban government, new setup in Afghanistan. And China has already announced $31 million in aid for the new government. And going back to the point that I wanted to make earlier, that who's going to recognize the Taliban-led government in Afghanistan now? I think it's already very clear. If you look at the number of embassies that are still open in Kabul, and which countries are those? So it's Russia, it's Iran, it's Pakistan, it's China. They have their fully functional embassies with their ambassadors still being based there. So it's quite clear that they have perhaps some kind of a consensus on that front. But the Taliban, as I said again earlier as well, they're not making things easier for Pakistan to be their key kind of partner, lobbying for them, because they could have, maybe perhaps for the time we played the game by making their interim government more inclusive. But I think they are not even willing to do that.
Okay, thank you very much. This was really comprehensive. Now, moving to Dr. Debsalar. We have talked about refugees, and we have talked about recognizing the coming government, probably not the transitional one, but the one that should come later, I suppose. And also about militias. Now, my question for you is, for so long, Iran recruited thousands of its Shiite Afghan refugees to fight its war in Syria and elsewhere in the region. Now, do you think that Tehran will be willing to use them as a leverage against Taliban if things went the wrong way in the future? This is the first question. And the second question, Yusuf has mentioned some conditions that Turkey might put before recognizing any coming government. Do you think that Iran has such a list regarding recognizing any coming government in Afghanistan?
There are good questions, but if you let me, I would like to go back for a second to issue of migration, because I think that's a very important issue, which also looks to the question that you raised, of course.
Yes.
I think Iran's policy regarding the Afghan migrants was based on the society-to-society connection that for a long time has been, and seeing most of those migrations as a broader Persian world. So that's a very important dynamic of the mindset of the Iranians when it comes to design of their migration policy. I mean, I just want you to notice this, for example, interesting fact that when this crisis come up, the borders were still open, and the government in Sistan Balochistan, the governor of Sistan Balochistan, which was, of course, it's a central policy, was asking the normal people, Iranians, to open the homes and host migrants. So there's this policy of opening the door and hosting migrants inside the home of Iranians. You may see it in many southern provinces of Iran, like Kerman, like Bandar Abbas. You have cities in Kerman which are basically Afghan migrants are living inside in the Iranian homes, or as working, or in different formats. But that concept of migration policy is a bit different from what I may say a European mindset of migration, which is or borderline concept, which tries to create a kind of a borderline, close the borderlines, and then protect it physically. That's a different mindset, and I think the question that you raised, that is there any deliberate policy that Iran wants to send migrants toward Turkey. I agree with Yusuf that that's not the case. I mean, that's a very dynamic movement of a human and people-to-people connection that is forming. But at the same time, Iran is one of the major concerns of Iran because, as you know, the economy is under the sanctions, so there's not any more resources that already there are 3 million migrants, Afghans, and the estimates, we don't have any clear data how many new migrants have entered to the country. So there is no social capacity and resource capacity to absorb more migrants. So going to your question about the fact that how Iran might use these migrants as leverage, I would say that I don't see this option so realistic for current debate and current mindset in Tehran. As I said at the beginning of my discussion, I think there is a broad consensus in Tehran that there is the entering into Afghanistan physically and with a military means is a kind of, let's say, strategic trap that should be avoided. I mean, just for example, referring back to 1998, after that crisis of killings of the diplomats and how decision-making taken place when Ayatollah Khamenei wanted to decide whether they should send forces into Afghanistan or not, it's telling us a lot. For example, at that moment, Khamenei has ordered the RGC and army to prepare a draft plan of 48-hour intervention into Afghanistan and then immediate return back and give the land into the allied Iranian, which was the Northern Alliance at that time. But because even at that time, there was not such an internal reliable resistant force that Iran can even do that plan of 48-hour infiltration and then immediate return. So I think any policy of Iraq type or Syria type that is relied on the using of proxies in a format of creating leverage for a foreseen future is not part of Iran's strategy. Rather, Iran will more focus toward the trade, its financial market, which is somehow dependent on Afghanistan. You know, for example, right now, one of the key policies of the Iranian government from the first round of the Rouhani government was emphasizing on increasing trade with neighbors. That's a key factor, which right now Afghanistan has become. I think it's the second largest, it's already 11% of all Iranian non-oil export, which is around estimated to be $2.7 billion for current Persian calendar year. So that's a huge interest there. And that's why I think that Tehran is very much moving toward keeping those interests safe, safeguarding that interest of its trade, its private sector trade, which is mostly it's private sector trade, which is quite a lifeline of Iranian economy at this time, and also the issue of the currency. You know, Iran was relied on hard currency that was receiving from Afghanistan, which was coming as a kind of a help during the, well, let's say maximum pressure of the US. I think that would be one line of focus for Iranian government. But at the same time, another thing which I think would be a substitute to that idea of using proxy is the issue is a concern about the geopolitical cost of possible Iranian elimination from the trade routes. What also actually Dr. Zahid also mentioned about the fact of the China-Pakistan corridor, economic corridor, which if it takes place, basically a huge investment that Iran has done in Chabahar, on the port of Chabahar, will be impacted, will be negatively downgraded. So there is a major concern in the fact that Iran should play in a way that keep its interest of not being deleted from these large geopolitical trade route. And that says, makes the sense that Iran becomes very much, its policy very much linked to the way that the Chinese policy will form in Afghanistan. So I see a lot of connection between how future Iranian policy will take place and form with how possible Chinese and Pakistanis cooperation will take form, and then that impact on Iran and India's possible collaboration, or even move of Iran toward China to convince China to create, for example, a new railroad project between Kabul and Iran to cut this issue. So what I'm saying is that huge investment in Chabahar is not something that Iran easily can close its eyes over it. Saying all of these, your last question, I think for Tehran is a major credibility loss if it created a government in Tehran, in Kabul, that is not recognizing Hazara and Tajiks, because this is exactly where, as I said before, Iranian soft power and social power is. So I think Iranians do not want to make such a risk to recognize a state that is not taking the Hazara and Tajiks' interest in a way into account. Maybe that's not necessarily a format of having a minister in the cabinet, but at least a kind of a deal or a kind of agreement between Tehran and Kabul that somehow secure the interests of minority. I think that's one of the key red lines of Iran, because that's quite critical. If Tehran loses that, I would say, line of policy, it would be consequences on both on domestic politics, which of course impacts the whole policymaking process, but also on the credibility in Afghanistan and losing most of its leverage that it has. So what I think would be clear so far is that a line of inclusiveness and participation of other minorities in the government, which is basically, I think, what the U.S. and other regional actors, and there is here where the common interest of, I think, most of the Afghan neighbors and also international community is defined.
Thank you. This was very insightful. I had a note, but I didn't want to interrupt you so that we can keep listening to your thoughts. But when I asked about the possibility of employing the militia, I didn't mean the current refugees in Afghanistan, but Iran already trained and equipped thousands of Afghani refugees and used them in Syria and elsewhere in the form of Fatimiyun groups. And at certain point, also former Minister Mr. Jawad Zarif also implicitly implied that the Afghani government should use them to resist Taliban. So there was some thoughts about this issue. So my question was, is it possible that we can see such a scenario in the future if Taliban went the other side vis-a-vis Iran? So that was actually the question.
If I have 1 minute to reply to your point, I got your idea of how future dynamics may impact. I think what is right now quite important is remembering the fact that the situation in Afghanistan is in the making. So we are still in the process of the transition of government, and many new wild cards may take place, many new shifts of dynamics may take place. And that's why exactly, we don't know how states, including Iranians, Pakistanis, Turkish, may react in future in the upcoming of new events. But I don't see it as with the current situation. So my argument is that I think very much Iran's policy in Afghanistan, it's correct, it's situational adjustment, because the situation is so dynamic and shifting and moving. But at the same time, it has some principles. Using proxies to create leverage against Taliban is not one of those principles that is on the table of Iranians from the very beginning or these days. But as situation evolves, well, maybe that would be a future possibility if needed. But I don't see that at least in the near future.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Now, moving to Mr. Yusuf, we have talked about Turkey's geopolitical security, maybe cultural interests in Afghanistan. But my question is that, do you think there is an economic dimension of Turkey's strategy in Afghanistan, especially taking in consideration that Afghanistan reportedly have between $1 and $3 billion worth rare metals and natural riches. So is there any kind of economic interest for Turkey in Afghanistan? Also, regarding the reconstruction, we have talked that China may be already thinking of financing or investing in Afghanistan. Now, taking into consideration Turkey has the second biggest contracting and construction sector in the world, what can Turkey do, or what can it play in this regard in Afghanistan?
I think that's not only Turkey's interest. I think it's the interest of every country, especially every country that's represented by the experts on this panel as well. But I think that's phase 2 right now. There's still some time before the economic interests of everyone's at play. We heard about how important certain ports are, how important the logistic arteries are, of course, how important the rare earth minerals inside Afghanistan are, how important certain strategic transportation assets are as well. And these will all come into play once the chaos settles. But right now, I think number one is security and stability on the ground. But yes, as you mentioned, Turkey, a very important player in construction globally. The logistics lines between Afghanistan and Turkey, we mentioned a little. I think you said we'll talk about it later. Maybe we'll talk about it a little right now. The middle corridor, very important. The most feasible route right now between China and European markets is through the middle corridor. It's the quickest route. Right now, the most secure route. Obviously, there is a north corridor running through Russia, but again, while China and Russia do have lukewarm relations, China does not want to rely solely on any type of logistics that runs through Russia to be able to safeguard itself against any type of future deterioration in that relationship. So these types of alternative routes, like the middle corridor, we're going to see China most likely utilize the Istanbul-Tehran-Islamabad train route in the future more and more. There will most likely be corridors through Afghanistan, and Turkey operating Kabul airport, may be providing security in the future at Kabul airport. It will be a very important step in logistics of goods coming in and out of Kabul. So, of course, Turkey has interests economically, but that I don't think that's different from any other country that's trying to have relations or have an influence inside Afghanistan. And I also want to mention a little, one little line about Pakistan as well. Mr. Ahmed was talking about the relationship with Turkey. Turkey and Pakistan are right now part of a joint military exercise in Azerbaijan. This is the second time Turkey and Pakistan have had a joint military exercise this year. So there seems to be a very strong desire to increase the interoperability of Turkish and Pakistani security forces. So that's an interesting dynamic to keep in the back of the mind as the situation unravels in Afghanistan, maybe future Central Asia, maybe future towards southern neighbors. Let's not give any names, but that's a very interesting dynamic to have that interoperability between Turkey and Pakistan. There seems to be a desire between both countries to increase that, and also a desire to increase weapons transactions between both countries as well. But again, we've been talking about logistics, our Iranian guests valuing the Iranian port that could become obsolete in the future as well. Again, Pakistan valuing its arteries through the Belt and Road. And when we're talking about $1 trillion project that was rolled out a couple, well, not a couple years ago, a little longer, obviously every country wants a piece of this pie. Every country wants to be part of the arteries that link China, the world's biggest economy, to one of the world's most important markets, Europe. And Turkey, obviously, very comfortable geographically being at a bottleneck between Europe and Asia. Some other countries a little less comfortable as there's more alternatives regarding logistics. But Kabul airport will be important. It looks like Turkey's going to be there with Qatar. Is Turkey interested in rare earth minerals? There are some Turkish mining companies. I don't think they're big enough players to take these rare earth mining contracts by themselves, but I do think that Turkey will play a major role in the construction I know that many Turkish countries had contracts in Afghanistan via NATO, under NATO, with NATO acting as the chief contractor and handing it out to Turkish companies. So Turkish companies do have a lot of experience operating in the terrain of Afghanistan. But before any of that's spoken about, obviously there's going to need to be security and stability. Without security and stability, there can't be any talk of economics yet. And as our other guests mentioned, there's still a lot of wild cards that many other countries are going to play, that the Taliban's going to play. And until these wild cards are properly digested and the situation is properly analyzed, that it's safe and secure to be able to roll out these bigger investments, and who's going to be financing these investments, that's important as well. Obviously, China is going to be an important financier, but to what level is America going to finance any type of construction rebuilding? Will it feel the responsibility to rebuild Afghanistan? That's an important question. And what will the EU, what will the United Nations do? These are very important topics that still need to be answered before we can really have in-depth conversation about the economics of Afghanistan.
Well, thank you. Actually, also without economy and finance, it's hard to sustain security and stability, even if we moved in the right direction. So it is interdependence. But let me say something regarding the middle corridor. You have mentioned it twice, and it's really very important. There are some experts who think that this middle corridor is isolating Iran because it focuses on a route through Georgia and Azerbaijan via the Caspian Sea to Turkmenistan to Afghanistan. And this is a response to Iran's long stand of trying to prevent Turkey from reaching the Central Asian markets. So how accurate also is this assessment in your opinion?
I don't think it's accurate. There's many arteries. The North Corridor would be isolating Turkey by the same calculations. So there's many arteries. There's going to be many new arteries built into the Belt and Road. I mean, the way what we're looking at right now, the way the Belt and Road looks today, and the way it's going to look 10, 15 years from tomorrow, today, is going to be a completely different makeup. And many new corridors will be added. There's going to be many important railways added, many important shipping lanes added. I mean, most recently, they're talking about a Nakhchivan corridor right now in Azerbaijan. That's going to change the makeup. That might end up isolating Georgia, removing Georgia from the equation and adding Azerbaijan directly to Turkey over Nakhchivan.
But let me interrupt you here. No, but Georgia is already included in the middle corridor. So as you mentioned, right now, the two corridors are not including Iran, knowing that Iran is the shortest way towards Afghanistan. So instead of making this, why don't you pass directly through Iran?
It definitely is. It definitely is. And with Afghanistan reaching security and stability, hopefully in the future, there may be future corridors that incorporate directly from Afghanistan into Iran. Very simply, if you look at the Istanbul-Tehran-Islamabad railway project, if you open up on a map, if there was a portion of it going through Afghanistan, I believe, if I remember correctly, it would be a much shorter distance from Istanbul to Islamabad. So right now, many of these calculations are made looking at the geopolitics of today, looking at the security situation of today. Of course, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. There's been, I mean, when we look at Afghanistan, Afghanistan's been in chaos for more than 30 years, more than 30 years. So there can be no big time international railway investments going through Afghanistan over these past 30 years because no one is willing to make that investment when they don't see security and stability. So it's obviously going to be in Iran's best interest to make sure that Afghanistan is secure and stable if they want to be included in more and more of these very important logistics and commercial highways and railways.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we are coming slowly to the end of the event. I want to ask Dr. Ahmed. Mr. Yusuf mentioned the Turkey, Iran, Pakistan train line. There were, plans to activate it long time ago, and they recently tested it. And there are plans to operate it as soon as possible. But In the light of the latest developments also in Afghanistan, do you think that a trilateral mechanism to cooperate between Turkey, Iran, and Pakistan in Afghanistan possible? And if yes, in what way? And if no, why?
Yes, it could work, but it's again, it's a matter of what is going to be more convenient. More convenient is going to have a kind of a regional approach in which other key stakeholders are also involved. Okay, so there has been some talk of, for example, Shanghai Cooperation Organization could play a more effective role in Afghanistan, for example, because India is a member, Pakistan is a member as well, and Afghanistan and Iran are kind of like in the waiting list. But then it leaves Turkey out, so, but then there is Economic Cooperation Organization already that could be used more effectively. But I think moving forward, what Pakistan is trying to showcase is that it's not limited to just cooperation with one or two regional actors. It's trying to have maybe more actors on board, as I mentioned earlier as well. And I think it won't be in a position to leave out China from any equation that emerges. Of course, the relationship with the Muslim countries is important. And Pakistan has approached, for example, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, for example, was approached to host an emergency meeting that happened. At the UN level, Pakistan urged the international community to talk to the Taliban at least, to give them a chance. So Pakistan is trying to look for maybe the engagement of more actors or all relevant actors going forward in Afghanistan. And also, I think because we are coming to close, and I think I wanted to share some of my insights based on my discussions with policymakers in Pakistan. So I think as historically, Pakistan's support for the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan was mainly through bureaucratic support, not really financial support. It was more technical support by sending advisors who were running the show, day-to-day business for the Islamic Emirate as advisors in various ministries. Similar is the talk this time around, because everyone knows in Pakistan, especially the policymakers, that the Taliban, they are good at two things. Okay, in the past, they were only good at one thing, which was fighting. Now they are good at two things, fighting plus negotiations. And we have seen that they have been successful even with the US in terms of negotiations, in which they had the upper hand. They are not mentioned as the Taliban, they are mentioned as the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan in the peace deal itself. And they got their prisoners released, and many of them went back to fighting and so on. So everyone knows that, these are their strengths, and their weaknesses would be in terms of how they are going to run day-to-day affairs in Afghanistan. So already in Islamabad, in some circles, they're talking about how much money does the Taliban government need to run their day-to-day business, let's say for another year or so. So they have made some estimates about that, and Pakistan is trying to lobby for enough support that they can at least pay salaries to the government officials. And also there is some discussion about integrating the Afghan National Army, how they are going to integrate them into the new system. I think that is going to be also very important. And also Pakistan is again thinking of sending advisors, okay, to at least play that role in terms of bureaucratic support. If other countries are providing, financial support, and of course, as our friend from, TRT, Mr. Aram also shared, that Pakistan is not willing to have boots on the ground, not willing to have, its military presence. So it's very much in favor of other countries managing that security aspect of the airport, and provide its, more technical support in terms of human resources to run these various ministries, and to run, for example, banks and, let's say you can say stock exchange or international trade for the new setup in Afghanistan.
Okay, thank you very much. This was great. We will see how sustainable is the Taliban version 2. And regarding your note, yes, the deal between US and Taliban mentioned the Emirate, the Islamic Emirate, but also between brackets, not recognized by the US according to the text of the same deal. Now, my question to Mr. Debsaalar, and what is in your opinion, the best scenario for Iran in Afghanistan? And We have mentioned a lot of players: China, Iran, Russia, Turkey, Pakistan. Which is the best regional actor to cooperate with, I mean, from the Iranian perspective right now?
I think, I mean, just very short continuation of our previous speaker. I think
no, take your time. Take your time.
Yeah, thank you. I think one factor that we didn't touch so far is the issue of climate change and drought, and how the Taliban can manage this issue, because that could create a huge security implications also, and trade and migration. So that's a major mega trend that will impact them. I mean, that's a correct way of looking at the situation, to see that, to argue that how Taliban can manage its multiple challenges that it has, as a way to see how other actors will react to Taliban's policy. But one main factor that I like to stress here is the reality that I think one of the main, at least, factors that can define future scenarios, different actors' behaviors and policies, is the dynamic of exclusion and inclusion that Taliban might create. What I mean by that is the fact that which countries the Taliban is going to play more, less, how Taliban is going to balance between different actors, because basically, you know, at the initial stage, each state is talking with Afghans separately. There's no, of course, we are talking about a regional format, but this regional format does not exist right now. So there's very limited level of cooperation, and that makes each state and individually try to secure its position, and that gives the space also to Taliban to start to kind of to enter into a kind of a exclusion-inclusion game. That's a quite important dynamic that will define the future of how other actors react. For example, in the case of Iran, if Iran is excluded by Taliban from the regional format, or by the interest that it's seeing there, or if the issue of water or migration, all these mega trends combine with each other, then the policy and the approach of Iran, or also Pakistan, or each of these states might change. So I'm saying that I would say that it's very difficult, as I said before, to propose a kind of a scenario because of a very dynamic situation that is taking place. And of course, the reality that, you know, I think there is an issue also on the global expert issue on the topic of Afghanistan, and also international community. I mean, we know very few about the strategic culture of Taliban. So what I mean by strategic culture, I don't mean necessarily by ideology. Of course, ideology is part of that. By the way they calculate, I mean, just looking at the number of, for example, studies on these just tells us that there are very few insight over this issue. So that, again, put us in a kind of black box situation that makes very difficult future analysis about how the direction of scenarios will go. Saying that, I think Tehran is very much like also Pakistan. It's very close, this approach to Pakistani view over the issue of regional framework. I think also Tehran is very much seeking to push for a kind of regional, let's say, architecture, or a regional collaboration format that can bring all the actors into a kind of understanding and a joint activity. I don't see it very easy or very in a near future, but it's positive anyway, from the sense that at least individual states are coming to an understanding that they cannot move separately. I think neither Russia, even China, Pakistan, Iran, and the Central Asian states, there is a broad understanding that none of these states can act alone over the issue of Afghanistan, and that is a good initial stage to be hopeful over it. But of course, I mean, we have the Shanghai Cooperation, but also the CSTO in let's say in Central Asia, but none of these current formats, I think, because as you said, for example, Turkey is not part of them, and it's now it's the number of actors which are not necessarily neighboring are more than the current architecture which is existing. So just maybe throwing an idea might be a kind of a ad hoc formats like the Astana format that was just created for the issue of Syria by Iran, Turkey, and Syria. We might see such ad hoc formats of regional cooperations in future too. I think one of the best scenarios that Iran will seek is pushing that towards such a regional format, because at the same time this is in line with the current administration in Tehran, Raisi administration, which is looking toward engagement with the East and toward engagement with its neighboring countries, and at the same time it's somehow responding to the principle that basically US is not part of that game at the beginning of this stage, which facilitates somehow, at least from Iranian perspective, running a format like that. So I think, and the last point I would say is that I think this adjustment, that how actors like Tehran, Pakistan, and the rest will also negotiate separately with Taliban in order to push Taliban in order to cooperation with such a regional format is also quite important in the possible success of these types of initiatives.
You're totally right. I agree with you on this point.
I do too.
I will be moving to you right now, Mr. Yusuf. We have noticed that most countries are moving closer to China and Russia in the current situation in Afghanistan. We have also some Central Asian countries like Tajikistan are strengthening actually their military cooperation with Russia, fearing backlash from Afghanistan or the spillover of the negative implications. Also, we have seen countries like Pakistan and Iran more interested in China because they probably know that China will have a deeper or bigger role in Afghanistan in the future. But we have seen an opposite trend when it comes to Turkey. We have seen more interest in going towards the US. So how do you assess this situation? And again, the same question goes to you. What's the best scenario for Turkey in Afghanistan in the coming period?
Well, I wouldn't say Turkey moving towards the US. I would say Turkey's trying to balance right now between Russia and the United States, obviously, with the dynamics in the region with Syria, with Libya, with Azerbaijan. Turkey has had to increase its dialogue tremendously with Russia because Russia has been a major actor in those conflicts and Turkey has been a major actor in those conflicts. So it's very hard for Turkey to be part of the problem-solving process unless it had a strong dialogue with Russia. Again, Turkey's going to have to sit down at the table again with Russia when they're talking about Afghanistan, because Russia will be an important player there too. The United States is withdrawing from Afghanistan, so their diplomacy, their footprint on the ground, their economic ties, besides possibly sanctioning and withholding money from Taliban, the United States seems to have a much more diminishing role. It looks like Turkey's desire to be at Kabul airport may be an extension of its role inside NATO. Turkey is trying to play an important role with security and stability there and provide humanitarian aid. It's trying to be a bridge for the West into Afghanistan, but I don't think that Turkey sees the US as its major partner in Afghanistan. I think Turkey understands the geopolitical dynamics of the region very, very well, and it understands that Pakistan's going to be a major player, China's going to be a major player, and maybe after those two will come Russia and Iran, and then followed by other countries. So it understands that if it wants to have a strong influence inside Afghanistan, that who it will have to engage in meaningful dialogue with. So I know that there was a top-level telephone call between Turkish foreign minister and Chinese foreign minister very, very recently. Obviously, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Russian President Vladimir Putin, they talk regularly on the phone every month. I think they communicate with each other more than any other duo of world leaders on the planet. So they also have very, very strong line of communications, speaking, I believe, 22 times just last year alone. So Turkey does have the necessary diplomatic engagements with regional actors to be able to continue to play an important role in Afghanistan. And while it will continue dialogue with the United States, because the U.S. is very important for Turkey in other matters of its foreign policy, I don't think it sees Turkey, the United States, as a major player anymore in Afghanistan, and that any type of role or bridge it'll continue will be for the benefit of the Afghan people, trying to make sure humanitarian aid is provided. The Turkish foreign minister today stated that they provided humanitarian aid through the Turkish Red Crescent in Kabul, and that the Kabul embassy is open right now. That was just a very, very recent comment, I believe an hour before our event started. So Turkey understands that very, very well. But when we talk about Turkey, China as foreign policy, I do see both countries coming closer very, very, very quickly because of Turkey's presence in Central Asia, Turkey's presence in the Middle Corridor, Turkey's growing presence in Afghanistan, Turkey's growing presence in Africa as well. So when we see Turkey and China begin to meet each other more and more in different theaters across the region and many other regions, we're going to see those relations strengthen much, much more. And one more topic I wanted to talk about, I feel like we didn't dive into it enough. I think terrorism is very, very important. I think the attack on the Kabul airport by Daesh Khorasan was very, very eye-opening for many people. I think it concerns Turkey a lot. I think when Turkey looks at Afghanistan from a security perspective, it sees it as much bigger than Afghanistan, because a group with the resources that Daesh has can very, very quickly spread outside of Afghanistan's borders. They have the potential to terrorize, radicalize, destabilize countries in Central Asia. When we look at the major Daesh attacks inside of Turkey, we have to remember that they were carried out by not Arab origin Daesh members, but Central Asian origin Daesh members. I think there's a very important point that spooks Turkey regarding Daesh Khorasan and its ability to spread in that region. So I think very, very important that Turkey will definitely have demands on the Taliban, not only to keep Al-Qaeda in check, but I think Turkey's much more interested in seeing Taliban keeping and launching counterterrorism operations against, or working together with them to launch counterterrorism operations against a group like Daesh Khorasan that has the potential to indirectly hurt Turkey as well.
I totally agree with you on your last point. I actually think that one of the biggest challenges that Taliban will face in the post-US withdrawal from Afghanistan is how to counter radical and terrorist groups like ISIS. But as we are coming to an end of our great...
One last sentence, if you will. Quickly, I totally agree with our Iranian friend also about a small group for Afghanistan. I think the small group mentality and the trend of small groups solving these types of dynamic problems is growing. I think it's growing in momentum. I think it's a diplomatic understanding that more countries need to embrace. These massive organizations like the United Nations or NATO with 20, 30, 40, 100 members, they're not equipped to be able to make dynamic decision-making, especially solve very fluid situations like Afghanistan or like Syria. And I think that Turkey's diplomatic understanding and Iran's diplomatic understanding, whether it be Astana or other small groups throughout, is very suitable. A country like Pakistan is very suitable. A country like China is very suitable to have a small group, not as small as 3, because I believe that Afghanistan right now needs more players, but a group of 5, 6, 7 countries getting together, taking very dynamic situations, and that are widely representative of the region. China widely representative of the East, Pakistan and Iran neighbors. Turkey could be a window to the West, a window to NATO as part of that group, and Russia, a very important player. I think this would be a very dynamic group that can make quick decisions to solve a fluid situation.
I totally agree with you. I actually think that Turkey managed to lead this kind of grouping in the last 2 years. I actually wrote an article about it. We have like Turkey, Pakistan, Azerbaijan, Turkey, Qatar, Turkey, Ukraine, also Azerbaijan. So we have such settings that aim to solve such problems effectively. But as we coming to an end of this session, as I mentioned, quickly I want to, because Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Qatar recently visited Pakistan, Iran, and Turkey, I would like to touch upon this issue. What are your country's expectations from Qatar in this regard regarding Afghanistan, and what kind of cooperation you can do in the future? I will start with Dr. Zahid, then I will be moving to Dr. Dibsalar, then to you, Yusuf. Please keep it short to 2 minutes at most.
Thank you very much. I think it's an important question, and we need to understand that Pakistan anyways enjoys a very good relationship with Qatar. It's, you know, it's outside of just the Taliban factor, but also, you know, through the Taliban's office in Doha, you know, Pakistan maintained its continued engagement in various dialogue forums. It was, you know, its foreign minister was there at the signing of the peace deal and so on. And now going forward again, you know, I'm repeating myself, I think the third time, you know, are Pakistan's economic realities. And Pakistan understand that very well, that going forward, it needs to have some, you know, rich countries on board, as was the case, you know, last time around when the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan was recognized by Pakistan, UAE, and Saudi Arabia. So moving forward, I think Pakistan wants that legacy to somehow also continue with more actors on board this time around. And I think it also recognizes that, you know, Qatar has played a very key role in terms of, you know, the Afghanistan peace process, and also has been, you know, like other international actors also understand Qatar's leverage in this case, because they have less hope of actually changing Taliban's behavior from Pakistan, and they have more sort of expectations. International community, especially I think Western nations, they have higher expectations from Qatar to be able to change the Taliban's you know, behavior moving forward. You know, whether it's on the issue of women, we heard, for example, the French foreign minister who was in Doha, he talked strongly about what role Qatar can play to convince the Taliban to have some kind of an inclusive government and respect international norms and values.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dibsalar.
Yeah, that's all. I agree. That's a very good question. Also to conclude, I think, you know, what Qatar has, which is a credibility among all actors that we basically before mentioned, that's its major leverage. But at the same time, I think there's a growing trend and trust over small states' role in security building mechanisms. I think the US and also the EU has well also understood the fact that, you know, entering and engaging by their own means into the region might not be possible. They might not have the leverage and also interest, and also even the bureaucratic, for example, looking at EU, the bureaucratic mess that currently with a lot of other crises around, that basically blocks any major actor at the international level to easily engage. But what I think makes also the role of Qatar is more important is the fact that Qatar can be also not just a facilitator and mediator between Taliban and the rest of those players, but also between those broader US, NATO, and EU positions with the regional actors, which is that's so important. Anyway, we cannot forget that it's still. I think US will remain a major player in Afghanistan, because at least on the economic sense, there's a huge economic dependency. Afghanistan is an aid-driven economy, so how US decides over its policy of sanction to Afghanistan or continued blockade of Afghan funds or in IMF and in the rest of it, and how also EU decides over its aid to Afghanistan. These are all factors that keep still these actors with the major leverage, and that's says that we need an actor that can represent, might be easier also having them directly represented, but even not, the role of Qatar as a player can bring all of these actors together, I think is quite important. And finally, I think something which we should not forget is the fact that we need still time, and that's a very let's say gradual step-by-step process to respond to this crisis. And I hope that at least this shuttle diplomacy that exists between the states in the region can be used as a kind of a mechanism to respond to immediate crises that might emerge while that's a larger framework of cooperation are in making.
That's a very important point. Thank you very much, Dr. Dibsalar. Mr. Yusuf, 2 minutes, please.
Qatar's had quite an incredible diplomatic year. I mean, the year started with an Alula agreement and GCC reconciliation, Doha talks, and now becoming a major player in Afghanistan diplomatically. And I just want to reiterate what the other two guests said. Its status as a small state and its relations with many of the key actors, very good relations with Turkey, very good relations with Iran, good relations with Pakistan, with the United States. Right now, Qatar is probably the most favored country in Washington, D.C. think tank circles. Everybody is praising Qatar for its job with the evacuations and the role it played in helping the United States. So very strong relations with the U.S. right now. Again, good with China, good with Russia. So it is a country, one of the very few countries that all these actors would accept as a mediator at the table. And I think that's very, very important. Right now, Qatar is basically the Switzerland of the Afghanistan issues. So I think it has a very unique status in this. Turkey's expectation, obviously, right now is to operate Kabul airport, but that's the immediate expectation of Turkey right now with Qatar, because this is something that has been discussed now for a couple months, and it looks like it's coming to fruition very, very soon. But I think the broader and more long-term expectation by Turkey of Qatar will be to continue playing this diplomatic role, maybe take on a financial role in the future. That could be a possibility. I don't know to what level Qatar will want to enter that. And also humanitarian aid assistance as well, because this is something that Turkey values, and Turkey is providing humanitarian aid right now. So Turkey's going to continue working with Qatar, and it'll be very interesting to see what can become of operating the airport together, what other type of cooperation that might spawn inside Afghanistan as well.
Thank you very much, Yusuf, and we will definitely upload this to the YouTube. It was a very rich and insightful session. I would personally like to thank my colleagues and friends, Dr. Ahmed from Australia, Dr. Dibsalar from Italy, and Yusuf from Doha. Hopefully we can meet in person soon to discuss such vivid issues, and have a good night. See you soon, inshallah. Bye-bye. Salam.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Guys, it was such a pleasure meeting you, talking with you. I really enjoyed your commentary.
It was a
Thank you. See you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.